The fluorescent lights in the Riverside County Courthouse buzzed overhead like angry wasps as I helped my grandmother Rose into the uncomfortable wooden chair. Her arthritis-worn hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her navy blue cardigan, the same one she'd worn to every important occasion for the past decade. At 83, Grandma Rose still carried herself with dignity, but I could see the exhaustion in her pale green eyes. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Williams," the bailiff announced. The courtroom felt suffocating despite its high ceilings. To my left sat my Uncle Vernon and his wife Linda, both dressed in expensive suits that screamed of their recent financial success. Vernon's real estate business had been booming, and it showed in every thread of his Italian leather shoes. Behind them, their twin sons, Brandon and Brett, slouched in their chairs, occasionally snickering and whispering to each other like this was some kind of entertainment. "This is ridiculous," Vernon had said outside the courthouse earlier. "Mom can barely remember what she had for breakfast, and now she wants to play games with the family property?" I squeezed Grandma Rose's shoulder gently. "You okay?" I whispered. She nodded, but I noticed her hands shaking more as she reached for the glass of water on the table. The tremor had gotten worse since Grandpa Joe passed away 6 months ago. The doctors said it was a combination of Parkinson's and grief, a cruel cocktail that made even simple tasks feel monumental. "Your Honor," Vernon's attorney, a sharp-faced man named Patterson, stood up with theatrical confidence. "We're here today because my client has serious concerns about his mother's mental capacity to make sound financial decisions regarding the family estate." I felt my stomach drop. This wasn't just about money, this was about respect, about family, about everything Grandma Rose had worked for during her 50-year marriage to my grandfather. The estate in question wasn't massive by California standards, but it was substantial. The family home in Riverside where I'd spent countless summers, a small rental property in Palm Springs, and about $400,000 in savings and investments. More importantly, it represented 5 decades of love, sacrifice and memories. "Mrs. Rose Harrison," Judge Williams addressed my grandmother directly. "Do you understand why we're here today?" Grandma Rose started to speak, but her voice came out as barely more than a whisper. She cleared her throat and tried again. "Yes, Your Honor. My son wants to take control of my affairs because he thinks I'm not capable anymore." Vernon leaned over to whisper something to Patterson, who nodded knowingly. "Mrs. Harrison," Patterson said, approaching the witness stand where Grandma Rose now sat. "Can you tell us what you had for breakfast this morning?" The question was clearly designed to embarrass her. I watched as my grandmother's face flushed slightly. I had oatmeal. With blueberries, I think." "You think?" Patterson pressed. "Are you certain?" "Objection," called out Janet Morrison, the attorney I'd helped Grandma Rose hire. "Relevance goes to mental capacity, Your Honor." "I'll allow it, but move along, Mr. Patterson." The questioning continued for what felt like hours. Patterson asked about bank account numbers, property taxes, medication schedules, all designed to make my grandmother appear confused and incompetent. Each time she hesitated or her hands shook while reaching for documents, I could see Vernon and his family exchanging satisfied glances. The worst moment came when Patterson asked Grandma Rose to sign a sample document to test her ability to execute legal papers. As she gripped the pen with trembling fingers, trying to steady her hand enough to write her signature, I heard it, a barely suppressed snicker from across the courtroom. Brandon, Vernon's 25-year-old son, was covering his mouth, trying to hide his laughter at his grandmother's struggle. "Look at her," he whispered loudly enough for several people to hear. "She can barely hold a pen." Linda elbowed him sharply, but the damage was done. Other family members, Vernon's sister Carol and her husband Mike, were shaking their heads with what looked like pity mixed with impatience. "This is painful to watch," Carol murmured to Mike. Grandma Rose's signature came out shaky and uneven, nothing like the confident script I remembered from birthday cards and Christmas presents throughout my childhood. She looked up at me with such sadness in her eyes that I felt my heart breaking. "Thank you, Mrs. Harrison," Patterson said dismissively. No further questions. During the lunch recess, I found Grandma Rose sitting alone on a bench outside the courthouse, staring at her hands. "They think I'm a joke," she said quietly. "My own family thinks I'm some kind of burden." "Grandma, that's not true. You're the strongest person I know." She looked at me with those tired green eyes. "Tommy, I need to tell you something. Something I haven't told anyone, not even your grandfather before he passed." The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps as she began to speak, her voice stronger than it had been all morning. 53 years ago, when your grandfather and I bought that first little house on Magnolia Street, We didn't just buy a home. We bought a future. Every mortgage payment, every repair, every improvement, we did it thinking about our family, about our children and grandchildren. She paused, watching a group of pigeons pecking at crumbs near the fountain. Your Uncle Vernon was 12 when we moved into that house. He helped his father paint the fence, plant the lemon tree in the backyard. He used to say he'd live there forever, that he'd raise his own children in those same rooms. What happened? I asked, though I suspected I already knew. Life happened. College, career, money. He moved to Newport Beach, bought that big house with the ocean view. Started talking about our neighborhood like it was some kind of embarrassment. Mom, why don't you sell that old place and move into a nice retirement community? Her hands were steadier now, no longer trembling as she spoke. But you, Tommy, you're different. Every summer since you were 7 years old, you've spent at least 2 weeks with us. You helped your grandfather fix the roof when you were 15. You painted your grandmother's kitchen when you graduated college. You never once acted like our home was beneath you. I felt tears threatening at the corners of my eyes. Grandma, you and Grandpa gave me the best memories of my childhood. That house isn't just property to you. It's home. And that's why, she trailed off, reaching into her purse. Why what? She pulled out a manila envelope, worn around the edges. That's why I had my attorney prepare these papers 3 months ago, right after your grandfather's funeral. I've been carrying them around, trying to decide if I was making the right choice. What papers? A new will, Tommy. And a property transfer document. If I sign these papers today, everything goes to you. The house, the rental property, the savings accounts, all of it. I stared at her in shock. Grandma, I can't let you do that. What about Uncle Vernon? What about the rest of the family? The rest of the family, she said with a bitter laugh, just spent the morning trying to prove I'm too incompetent to manage my own affairs. They want to put me in a nursing home and sell everything your grandfather and I spent our lives building. The courthouse clock chimed 1:30 p.m. Court would resume in 30 minutes. But if you sign those papers, she continued, I know the house will stay in the family. I know someone who truly loves it will take care of it. And maybe, just maybe, your Uncle Vernon will realize that respect and love matter more than money. As we walked back into the courthouse, I couldn't help but notice how differently Grandma Rose carried herself. Her spine was straighter, her steps more purposeful. She still looked like a frail elderly woman to anyone watching, but I could sense a steel determination that hadn't been there that morning. The afternoon session was about to begin, and I had no idea that everything was about to change. Judge Williams called the court back to session at exactly 2 p.m. The afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows, casting geometric patterns across the marble floor. Grandma Rose sat beside me, that manila envelope resting quietly in her lap like a sleeping secret. Mr. Patterson, Judge Williams said, you may continue with your case. Vernon's attorney stood confidently, adjusting his tie. Thank you, Your Honor. I'd like to call Vernon Harrison to the stand. My uncle walked to the witness stand with the swagger of someone who believed he'd already won. His expensive suit caught the light as he raised his right hand for the oath. Mr. Harrison, Patterson began, please tell the court about your concerns regarding your mother's ability to manage her financial affairs. Vernon settled into his chair, his voice taking on the practiced tone he used when selling houses to wealthy clients. Your Honor, I love my mother dearly, but I'm deeply worried about her deteriorating condition. In the past 6 months since my father's death, she's become increasingly confused and disoriented. Can you provide specific examples? Absolutely. Last month, I visited her home and found expired food in the refrigerator, some of it moldy. The bills were scattered across the kitchen table, some paid twice, others not at all. She couldn't remember our conversation from the previous week about potentially moving to a safer living situation. I felt my jaw clench. I'd been to Grandma Rose's house just 2 weeks ago, and while it wasn't pristine, it was far from the disaster Vernon was describing. Furthermore, Vernon continued, she's become fixated on the idea that our family is somehow conspiring against her. She's mentioned giving away property to, frankly, unsuitable recipients out of spite rather than sound judgment. His eyes flicked toward me when he said, unsuitable recipients. In your opinion, Mr. Harrison, is your mother capable of making complex financial decisions? With all due respect to my mother, no. I believe she needs professional care and proper oversight of her assets to protect her from making decisions she'll regret or that she's being influenced to make. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Vernon was suggesting that I was manipulating Grandma Rose. Thank you. No further questions. Janet Morrison, Grandma Rose's attorney, stood for cross-examination. She was younger than Patterson, maybe 45, with graying hair pulled back in a practical bun. But her eyes were sharp, and I'd seen her taking detailed notes all morning. "Mr. Harrison," she began, "when did you last visit your mother's home?" "About 3 weeks ago." "And before that?" Vernon hesitated. "Well, I've been very busy with work." "Mr. Harrison, how many times did you visit your mother in the month following your father's funeral?" That was a difficult time for everyone. Please answer the question. How many times?" "Once. Maybe twice." "And in the month before your father's death, when he was in hospice care, how often did you visit?" Vernon's confident demeanor was starting to crack. "Look, I live in Newport Beach. It's a 2-hour drive each way. I have a business to run, employees depending on me. So once? Twice? Not at all. I was there for the important moments." Janet Morrison walked to her table and picked up a stack of papers. "Your Honor, I'd like to introduce Exhibit A, phone records showing calls between Mrs. Rose Harrison and her grandson Tommy over the past 6 months." She handed copies to the judge and Patterson. "As you can see, Tommy called his grandmother an average of 4 times per week since his grandfather's death. The calls range from 15 minutes to over an hour." She moved to the next document. Exhibit B, credit card receipts showing Tommy's visits to his grandmother's neighborhood. Grocery stores, pharmacy, hardware store. An average of twice per week for the past 6 months. I had no idea she'd been tracking this information. Exhibit C, a statement from Mrs. Rose Harrison's neighbor, Eleanor Martinez, who has lived next door for 15 years. Mrs. Martinez states that Tommy has been the primary source of support for Mrs. Harrison since Mr. Harrison's death, including grocery shopping, home maintenance, and transportation to medical appointments. Vernon was looking increasingly uncomfortable in the witness chair. "Now, Mr. Harrison," Janet continued, "you mentioned expired food and unpaid bills. Are you aware that your mother has been grieving the loss of her husband of 53 years? "Of course, but are you aware that grief can cause temporary disorientation and forgetfulness, especially in elderly individuals?" "I suppose, but are you aware that your mother has been seeing a grief counselor and that her cognitive assessment from last month shows no signs of dementia or significant mental impairment?" Patterson jumped up. "Objection. I haven't seen this assessment." "Your Honor," Janet replied smoothly, "this document was provided to opposing counsel yesterday afternoon as part of our discovery response." Judge Williams looked at Patterson, who was frantically shuffling through papers. "Overruled." "Continue, Ms. Morrison." "Mr. Harrison, have you spoken to your mother's doctor about her mental state?" "Well, no, but have you spoken to her pharmacist about her medication compliance?" "I don't see how." "Have you spoken to any of her neighbors, friends, or regular social contacts about their observations of her behavior?" "No." "So your assessment of your mother's mental capacity is based on what exactly?" "Your 1 or 2 visits over the past 6 months." Vernon was quiet for a long moment. "I'm concerned about her making impulsive decisions." "What kind of impulsive decisions?" "Well, she's mentioned wanting to give significant assets to Tommy, who's only 28 years old and works as a teacher." The way he said teacher made it sound like a communicable disease. "Are you suggesting that being an educator makes someone unsuitable to inherit family property?" "I'm saying that someone with limited financial experience shouldn't be trusted with a substantial estate." "Mr. Harrison, what is your annual income?" "I don't see how that's relevant." "Please answer the question." "Approximately $300,000. "And what is the approximate value of your current home?" "Around $1.2 million. "So you're hardly in need of financial assistance." "This isn't about money, isn't it?" Janet's voice rose slightly. "Mr. Harrison, have you discussed with your family what you would do with your mother's property if you gained control of it?" Vernon glanced nervously at his wife and sons. "We've discussed options." "What options?" "Well, the house is in an area that's been gentrifying. It's worth significantly more than when my parents bought it. It would make sense to sell and invest the proceeds more wisely." "And the rental property in Palm Springs?" "Same situation. These properties require maintenance, tenant management, it's a lot of responsibility." "So your plan is to sell everything?" "To liquidate assets and create a more manageable portfolio, yes." Janet turned to face the courtroom. "So to summarize, Mr. Harrison, you've visited your grieving mother once or twice in the past 6 months, you haven't spoken to any of her healthcare providers, you have no direct knowledge of her daily functioning, and your solution is to gain control of her assets and immediately sell the home where she's lived for 53 years. "That's not, you're twisting my words." "Am I?" No further questions. Vernon returned to his seat, his face flushed and his earlier confidence completely evaporated. Linda reached over to squeeze his hand, but I noticed she looked troubled by what had just transpired. Judge Williams looked at her notes. Ms. Morrison, do you have any witnesses you'd like to call? Yes, Your Honor. I'd like to call Thomas Rivera to the stand. My heart stopped. I hadn't expected to testify. As I stood up, I caught Grandma Rose looking at me with an encouraging smile. Walking to the witness stand felt like moving through water. Every eye in the courtroom was on me, and I could feel Vernon's family studying my every move. After taking the oath, I sat down and looked out at the faces staring back at me. This was my chance to defend the woman who had been more like a mother to me than a grandmother. Tommy, Janet Morrison began gently, how often do you visit your grandmother? 2 or 3 times a week, usually. More often if she needs help with something specific. What kind of help does she typically need? Grocery shopping mostly. She doesn't like driving at night anymore, so if she needs something from the pharmacy or the store after dark, she'll call me. Sometimes I help with yard work or small repairs around the house. How would you describe your grandmother's mental state? I looked directly at Grandma Rose. She's grieving. She misses my grandfather terribly and some days are harder than others. But she's sharp as ever when it comes to important things. She remembers every birthday, every anniversary. She can tell you stories about things that happened 40 years ago with perfect detail. Has she ever seemed confused or disoriented to you? Sometimes she has trouble remembering what day it is, or she might forget that she already told me a story. But honestly, I do that too sometimes and I'm 28. A few people in the courtroom chuckled softly. Tommy, your uncle suggested that you might be influencing your grandmother's decisions about her estate. How do you respond to that? I felt anger rising in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm. That's absolutely not true. Until today, I had no idea what was in my grandmother's will. We've never discussed it. When she mentioned the estate papers outside during lunch, I actually told her she shouldn't leave everything to me. Why did you say that? Because it doesn't seem fair to the rest of the family. Even if they haven't been around much lately. I could see Vernon shifting uncomfortably in his seat. Tommy, in your opinion, is your grandmother capable of making her own financial decisions? Completely. She balances her own checkbook, pays her bills on time, manages her medications. She's been handling the rental property in Palm Springs by herself since my grandfather died, including dealing with tenant issues and maintenance requests. If anything, she's been more organized and focused since she started seeing the grief counselor. Thank you. No further questions. Patterson stood for cross-examination, his expression much more aggressive than Janet's had been. Mr. Rivera, you're a high school teacher, correct? Yes. What's your annual salary? About $52,000. That's significantly less than what most people would consider financially comfortable, isn't it? I live within my means. Have you ever discussed your financial situation with your grandmother? Not really. Sometimes she worries that I work too hard for too little money, but that's just her being a grandmother. So she's aware that you struggle financially. I don't struggle. I choose a profession that's meaningful to me. A profession that doesn't pay very well. Objection, Janet called out. Argumentative. Sustained. Patterson continued. Mr. Rivera, wouldn't inheriting a substantial estate solve many of your financial concerns? I felt my face getting hot. Mr. Patterson, I didn't even know I was mentioned in my grandmother's will until 2 hours ago. If money was my motivation, don't you think I would have been pushing for this conversation months ago? Maybe you were more subtle about it. That's not a question. Patterson looked frustrated. Let me ask directly, if your grandmother left you her entire estate, would you sell the properties? No. Even though you could use the money? The house isn't just a piece of real estate to me. It's where I spent every summer growing up. It's where my grandmother taught me to cook, where my grandfather showed me how to fix things with my hands. It's home. I looked directly at Vernon. I'd live there. I'd take care of it. I'd make sure it stays in the family where it belongs. No further questions. As I returned to my seat, I noticed something had changed in the courtroom. Several members of Vernon's extended family were whispering among themselves, and not all of the expressions were supportive of Vernon's case anymore. Judge Williams looked at her watch. It's 4:15. We'll take a brief recess before closing arguments. During the break, I saw Carol approach Grandma Rose. Aunt Rose, she said quietly, I want you to know that not all of us agree with Vernon's approach here. Grandma Rose looked up at her with surprise. Mike and I have been talking, Carol continued, glancing at her husband. What Vernon said about the house, about selling everything, that's not what Mom and Dad would have wanted. Other family members were beginning to gather around, and I could see Vernon looking increasingly isolated with just his wife and sons for support. The battle lines were shifting, and I was starting to realize that Grandma Rose's plan might be more brilliant than I'd initially understood. When court resumed, the atmosphere had noticeably shifted. Carol and her husband Mike had moved to sit closer to our side of the courtroom, along with Grandma Rose's sister Dorothy, who had arrived during the recess. Even some of Vernon's extended family members seemed less certain about their allegiances. Judge Williams called for closing arguments. Patterson stood first, but his earlier confidence was clearly shaken. Your Honor, this case is fundamentally about protecting a vulnerable elderly woman from making decisions she may later regret. Mrs. Rose Harrison has suffered tremendous loss, and grief can cloud judgment. My client, Vernon Harrison, simply wants to ensure his mother's financial security and well-being. He gestured toward Vernon, who was fidgeting with his tie. Vernon Harrison is a successful businessman with proven experience in property management and financial planning. He has the resources and expertise to properly manage his mother's assets during this difficult transition period. Patterson's voice grew stronger as he continued. The court must consider what's truly in Mrs. Harrison's best interest, not what might feel emotionally satisfying in the moment, but what will provide long-term security and stability. Placing a substantial estate in the hands of a 28-year-old teacher, no matter how well-intentioned, is simply not prudent financial planning. He sat down and Janet Morrison rose for the defense. Your Honor, this case isn't really about financial planning at all. It's about respect, family values, and the fundamental right of a competent adult to make decisions about their own property. She walked closer to the judge's bench. The evidence presented today shows that Mrs. Rose Harrison is grieving, yes, but she is not incompetent. She has been assessed by medical professionals. She manages her daily affairs independently. She maintains her own home, handles tenant relationships, and makes sound decisions about her healthcare and personal needs. Janet turned to face the courtroom. What we've learned today is that Mr. Vernon Harrison has been largely absent from his mother's life during her greatest time of need. He has made assumptions about her mental state without consulting her doctors, her neighbors, or anyone else who interacts with her regularly. She paused, letting that sink in. Meanwhile, his nephew Tommy has been present. Not occasionally, not when convenient, but consistently multiple times per week for 6 months. He has provided practical support, emotional comfort, and genuine care without any expectation of financial gain. Janet's voice grew more passionate. Mr. Vernon Harrison testified that his plan is to sell his mother's home, the place where she's lived for 53 years, where she raised her children, where she cared for her dying husband. He would liquidate these properties to create what he calls a more manageable portfolio. But manageable for whom? She gestured toward Grandma Rose. This is not about what's easier for Vernon Harrison to manage from his home in Newport Beach. This is about what Rose Harrison wants for her own legacy. Judge Williams was listening intently, occasionally glancing at Grandma Rose. Your Honor, the law is clear. Competent adults have the right to distribute their property as they see fit. They can choose to reward loyalty over blood relation, presence over absence, love over convenience. The question before this court is simple. Is Rose Harrison competent to make this choice? The evidence overwhelmingly shows that she is. Janet returned to her seat and Judge Williams began reviewing her notes. Before I make my decision, the judge said, I'd like to hear directly from Mrs. Harrison. Mrs. Harrison, would you please approach the bench? I felt my heart race as Grandma Rose slowly stood. She walked to the front of the courtroom with careful but determined steps, the manila envelope still clutched in her hand. Mrs. Harrison, Judge Williams said gently, I've listened to testimony about your mental capacity, your financial situation, and your family relationships. But I'd like to hear from you directly. In your own words, what do you want to happen here today? Grandma Rose was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the faces in the courtroom, her family, both supportive and skeptical, watching her every word. When she finally spoke, her voice was clearer and stronger than it had been all day. Your Honor, I've been married for 53 years, raised 3 children, worked as a nurse for 30 years, and helped my husband build a successful small business. I've made thousands of decisions in my life, some good, some not so good, but all of them my own. She held up her hands, which were trembling slightly. My son thinks these shaky hands mean I can't think clearly anymore. But these hands delivered babies, they comforted dying patients, they signed the mortgage papers for our first home, and they held my husband's hand when he took his last breath 6 months ago. I could see people throughout the courtroom leaning forward, hanging on her every word. I am not incompetent. I am sad. I am lonely. I miss my husband every single day. But my mind is as clear as it's ever been, and I know exactly what I want to do with the life my husband and I built together. She looked directly at Vernon. I love my son. I will always love my son. But love doesn't mean letting someone else make my choices for me just because it's convenient for them. Her gaze moved to me. Tommy has been my anchor these past 6 months. Not because he wants something from me but because he loves me. He shows up when I need him. He listens when I tell the same stories over and over because grief makes me repeat myself. He fixes things around my house not because I ask him to, but because he notices what needs fixing. Now she addressed the entire courtroom. Some of you think I should be grateful that Vernon wants to manage my affairs. But I don't want my home sold to strangers. I don't want my life reduced to a more manageable portfolio. I want my legacy to go to someone who will honor it, protect it, and keep our family's history alive. She held up the manila envelope. I have the right to choose. And I choose to give my estate to the person who has shown me that family isn't just about blood, it's about showing up, day after day when someone needs you. The courtroom was completely silent. Even Brandon and Brett, who had been smirking earlier, were now staring at their grandmother with what looked like shame. Judge Williams nodded slowly. Mrs. Harrison, do you understand the financial implications of the decision you're making? Completely. I've discussed this extensively with my attorney and my financial advisor. I understand that Tommy will inherit approximately $800,000 in property and assets. I understand that this leaves Vernon and my other children with significantly less inheritance than they might have expected. And you're certain this is what you want? Absolutely certain. Judge Williams was quiet for a long moment, then looked up at the courtroom. After careful consideration of all testimony and evidence presented, this court finds that Mrs. Rose Harrison is mentally competent and fully capable of making decisions regarding her own financial affairs. Mr. Vernon Harrison's petition for conservatorship is denied. Vernon slumped in his chair as if he'd been punched in the stomach. Furthermore, the judge continued, Mrs. Harrison, if you wish to execute any estate planning documents today, you are legally free to do so. Grandma Rose looked at me then back at the judge. Yes, Your Honor. I would like to sign these papers now in front of everyone, so there can be no question about my intentions or my mental state. Janet Morrison stood. Your Honor, we have prepared all necessary documentation. Mrs. Harrison's new will and property transfer documents have been properly witnessed and notarized. Proceed. What happened next felt like a scene from a movie. Grandma Rose walked to the plaintiff's table, placed the manila envelope down, and carefully extracted the papers she'd been carrying all day. The courtroom was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. She picked up a pen with her trembling hands, the same hands that had been mocked that morning. But now, instead of appearing weak, her tremor seemed like a manifestation of her determination, her refusal to give in to others' expectations. This is my new last will and testament, she announced to the courtroom. And these are immediate property transfer documents for the house at 847 Magnolia Street and the rental property at 1523 Desert View Drive. As she began to sign, her signature started out shaky but grew steadier with each letter. By the time she finished her full name Rose Marie Harrison, the signature was bold and clear. She signed document after document, each one transferring another piece of the life she and my grandfather had built together. The house where I'd learned to ride a bike in the driveway. The rental property that had provided them with additional income for retirement. The investment accounts that represented decades of careful saving. When she finished, she looked up at Vernon. I hope someday you'll understand that this wasn't about punishing you. This was about rewarding the person who showed me what family really means. Vernon was staring at the floor, his face red with embarrassment and anger. Linda had tears in her eyes and even their sons looked uncomfortable. But it was Carol who broke the silence. Aunt Rose, she said, standing up from her seat. I want you to know that Mike and I support your decision. We've been talking with some of the other family members and we think you made the right choice. Dorothy, Grandma Rose's sister, nodded in agreement. Rose, Joe would be proud of you today. Judge Williams gathered the signed documents. These are now legal and binding. Mrs. Harrison, congratulations on successfully defending your right to self-determination. As we prepared to leave the courtroom, I was still in shock. In the span of a few hours, I'd gone from being a high school teacher living paycheck to inheriting nearly $1 million in property and assets. But more than that, I'd witnessed something extraordinary. I'd seen my grandmother transform from a seemingly fragile elderly woman being mocked for her shaky hands into a force of nature who refused to let anyone else control her destiny. Vernon and his family left quickly, avoiding eye contact with anyone. But several other family members approached us, apologizing for not speaking up sooner and expressing their support for Grandma Rose's decision. "Tommy," Grandma Rose said as we gathered our things, "I know this is overwhelming. But I need you to promise me something. Anything. Promise me you'll never let anyone tell you that caring for family is a weakness. What you've done for me these past 6 months, that's what strength looks like." As we walked out of the courthouse together, I realized that while I'd gained an inheritance, I'd also gained something far more valuable. A deeper understanding of what it means to be family, and the knowledge that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply show up when someone needs you. But our story wasn't over yet. In fact, the most surprising chapter was still to come. 3 weeks after the courthouse victory, I was in Grandma Rose's kitchen, now legally my kitchen, attempting to fix a leak under the sink when the doorbell rang. Through the window I could see a familiar figure standing on the front porch, shifting nervously from foot to foot. "Vernon. Should I get it?" I called to Grandma Rose, who was sorting through old photo albums in the living room. "It's your house now, dear," she replied. "But I think you should." I opened the door to find my uncle looking older than he had just 3 weeks ago. His expensive suit had been replaced by jeans and a simple button-down shirt, and the confident swagger was nowhere to be found. "Hey Tommy," he said quietly. "Is Mom available? I was hoping we could talk." "Of course. Come in." He followed me into the living room, where Grandma Rose was surrounded by decades of family photographs. She looked up at her son with an expression that was neither welcoming nor hostile, just cautious. "Vernon," she said simply. "Mom?" He sat down heavily in Grandpa Joe's old recliner, a choice that didn't go unnoticed by either of us. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since the hearing." Grandma Rose closed the photo album she'd been looking through. "Oh." Vernon was quiet for a long moment, staring at a family photo from Christmas 1995, all of us gathered around the tree in this very living room, back when the family felt whole and uncomplicated. "I owe you both an apology," he said finally. "Actually, I owe you more than an apology. I owe you an explanation, and maybe I owe myself some honesty." I sat down on the couch next to Grandma Rose, unsure what to expect. "Mom, when Dad got sick I was terrified. Not just sad, terrified. And I handled it by staying away, by convincing myself that I was too busy, that my business needed me, that someone else would handle the hard stuff." His voice cracked slightly. "But the truth is I couldn't stand watching him disappear. I couldn't handle seeing you in pain. So I ran like a coward, and I let Tommy step up and be the man I should have been." Grandma Rose's expression softened, but she didn't speak. Vernon continued, his voice growing stronger. "After the funeral, when the grief hit me like a truck, I didn't know how to process it. I'd lost my father, and I'd failed him in his final months. So instead of dealing with that pain, I convinced myself that the problem was you, that you were falling apart, that you needed me to swoop in and fix everything." He looked directly at me. "And when I saw how close you and Mom had become, how naturally you'd stepped into the role I'd abandoned, I felt threatened. Jealous maybe. It was easier to paint you as some kind of opportunist than to admit that you were just being a better grandson and a better son than I'd been." The afternoon sunlight streaming through the lace curtains caught the tears forming in Vernon's eyes. "The truth is, Tommy, you saved our family. When I was too scared to show up, you showed up. When I was too proud to help with groceries and doctor's visits and all those small things that matter, you did them without being asked. You gave Mom what she needed most, not money or management, but presence and love." I felt my own eyes getting watery. "Uncle Vernon." "No, let me finish." He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "That day in court, when I heard myself talking about selling this house, about liquidating Dad's life's work, I realized I'd become someone I didn't recognize. Someone Dad would have been ashamed of." He looked around the living room, taking in the family photos, the well-worn furniture, the lemon tree visible through the back window. "This house isn't just real estate. It's where I learned to ride a bike, where Mom bandaged my scraped knees, where Dad taught me to throw a baseball. It's where we celebrated every Christmas, every birthday, every milestone. And I was ready to sell it to strangers just to make my life more convenient." Grandma Rose reached over and took Vernon's hand. "Son, grief makes us do things we don't understand. I know you loved your father. I did love him. I do love him. And I love you, Mom. But I've been so angry at Dad for leaving, at you for reminding me of him, at Tommy for being everything I wasn't. The conservatorship thing that wasn't about protecting you. that was about punishing myself and taking everyone else down with me. The room fell silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock, the same clock that had marked time in this house for 30 years. Vernon took a deep breath. I talked to Linda and the boys after the hearing. We had some hard conversations. Linda said something that really hit home. She said I'd been so focused on preserving Dad's financial legacy that I'd completely ignored his actual legacy. What do you mean? I asked. Dad's legacy isn't money, Tommy. It's family. It's showing up for each other. It's this house full of memories, it's Sunday dinners, it's teaching your grandson how to fix a leaky faucet. He gestured toward the kitchen where I'd been working. Dad would be proud of you for taking care of Mom, for keeping the family together when I fell apart. Grandma Rose was crying now, but they were good tears. Vernon, she said softly, you're not a bad son. You were hurting, and hurt people sometimes hurt other people. But you're here now. That's what matters. Vernon nodded, then looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, respect mixed with genuine affection. Tommy, I know I can't undo the damage I've done, but I want you to know something. Mom made the right choice. This house, this family legacy, it belongs with someone who understands its real value. Someone who'll fill it with love instead of just managing it like a business asset. I was struggling to find words. Uncle Vernon, I never wanted to come between you and Grandma Rose. I couldn't stand the thought of her being alone. And that's exactly why you deserve this inheritance. Because it was never about the money for you. He stood up and walked to the mantel, where dozens of family photos were displayed. He picked up one from his high school graduation, him and my grandparents standing in front of this very house. You know what I realized looking at all these pictures? Every important moment of my life happened in this house. My first day of school, my graduation, bringing Linda here to meet my parents, introducing my sons to their grandparents. He paused. Maybe that's why the thought of losing it scared me so much. I thought if we sold the house, we'd lose all those memories too. But that's just it, Grandma Rose said gently. The memories don't live in the walls, Vernon. They live in us. And as long as we're family, those memories are safe. Vernon set the photo back down and turned to face us both. I have a proposition. Actually, more like a request. What kind of request? I asked. I want to help Tommy. Not with money, I know you don't need that now. But with the practical stuff. The rental property in Palm Springs, the maintenance on this place, dealing with contractors and repairs. I'm good at that stuff, and maybe it would be a way for me to honor Dad's memory while also being useful to the family again. I looked at Grandma Rose, who was smiling through her tears. Also, Vernon continued, Linda and I would like to start having Sunday dinners here again if you'd be okay with that. The boys need to connect with their family history, and honestly, we all need to remember what's important. Of course, I said immediately. This house should be full of family. There's one more thing. Vernon reached into his back pocket and pulled out a small wrapped package. This was Dad's. I was supposed to give it to you months ago, but I was too messed up to do the right thing. I unwrapped the package to find my grandfather's old pocket watch, the one he'd carried every day for as long as I could remember. He wanted you to have it, Vernon said. He told me the week before he died that you were the one who really understood what it meant to be part of this family. I held the watch carefully, feeling its familiar weight. Engraved on the back were the words, "Time spent with family is never wasted. Love, Grandpa Joe." He had that engraved just for you, Vernon added. He said someday you'd understand why he chose you to carry on the family traditions. I thought I was done crying, but apparently I was wrong. Over the next hour we talked more openly than we had in years. Vernon shared stories about growing up in this house that I'd never heard before. He told me about the fort he and his siblings built in the backyard, about sneaking down the stairs on Christmas morning, about the time he accidentally broke the living room window playing baseball, and how Grandpa Joe helped him fix it before Grandma Rose found out. You know, Vernon said as he prepared to leave, I spent so much time being jealous of your relationship with Mom and Dad that I forgot I could just join it. Instead of competing with you, I could learn from you. Uncle Vernon, there's nothing to learn. I just showed up. Tommy, just showing up is the hardest thing in the world sometimes. Trust me, I know. As he reached the front door, Vernon turned back one more time. Oh, and Tommy? That leak under the kitchen sink? There's a shut-off valve behind the dishwasher that's probably loose. Dad had the same problem every few months. Tighten it with a wrench and the leak should stop. I smiled. Thanks. I'll try that. And if it doesn't work, call me. I've got Dad's old tool collection in my garage. Time I put it to good use again. After Vernon left, Grandma Rose and I sat in comfortable silence for a while, processing everything that had just happened. Are you surprised he came? I asked. Not really, she said. Vernon's a good man who got lost for a while. Sometimes people need to hit rock bottom before they can find their way back up. Do you think things will really be different now? I think Vernon learned something important today, that family isn't about who deserves what. It's about who shows up, who helps, who loves without keeping score. She patted my hand. And maybe he also learned that there's room for everyone at the family table, as long as everyone's willing to contribute something meaningful. That evening, I fixed the leak under the sink using Vernon's tip about the shut-off valve. It worked perfectly. Apparently some family knowledge really does get passed down through generations. As I was cleaning up the tools, my phone rang. It was Vernon. Hey Tommy. Just wanted to let you know Linda and I talked to Brandon and Brett tonight. We had a long conversation about respect, family, and what it means to earn your place in the world. I think you'll find them different the next time you see them. That's good to hear. Also, I called Carol and some of the other family members. We're planning a big Sunday dinner this weekend, kind of a fresh start for everyone. Would that be okay with you? I looked around the kitchen where my grandfather had taught me to cook, where my grandmother had bandaged my childhood wounds, where 3 generations of family memories had been made. More than okay, I said. It sounds perfect. Good. And Tommy? Yeah. Thank you. For taking care of Mom, for keeping the family together, and for being gracious enough to give me a second chance. That's what family does, Uncle Vernon. After I hung up, I found Grandma Rose in the living room, still looking through photo albums. Look at this one, she said, holding up a picture from my 10th birthday party. Remember this? In the photo, I was wearing a party hat and grinning at the camera, surrounded by family members of all ages. Vernon was there, younger and happier, helping me blow out the candles. Grandpa Joe was in the background, smiling proudly at his whole family gathered together. That was a good day, I said. They all were good days, sweetheart. Even the hard ones. That's what family means, having people who'll celebrate with you and struggle with you and show up for you no matter what. As I got ready for bed that night in my childhood bedroom, now permanently mine, I reflected on how dramatically things had changed in just a few weeks. I'd inherited a house, but more importantly, I'd inherited a responsibility to keep our family story going. I pulled out Grandpa Joe's pocket watch and read the inscription again. Time spent with family is never wasted. He was right, of course. Every Sunday dinner, every grocery run, every quiet conversation on the front porch had been an investment in something more valuable than money, the bonds that make a family strong enough to weather any storm. The next Sunday, our dining room table was full for the first time since Grandpa Joe's funeral. Vernon and Linda were there with Brandon and Brett, who actually seemed interested in hearing family stories instead of rolling their eyes. Carol and Mike came with their daughter, and Dorothy brought her famous apple pie. As we passed dishes and shared stories, I realized that Grandma Rose's plan had worked even better than she'd hoped. She hadn't just protected the family legacy, she'd restored it. By making a choice that seemed to divide the family, she'd actually created the conditions for healing and reunion. Tommy, Grandma Rose said as we were cleaning dishes afterward, I hope you know that giving you this house wasn't just about rewarding you. It was about ensuring that our family would always have a home base, a place where everyone knows they belong. Looking around at the kitchen full of family members laughing and helping with cleanup, I finally understood what she meant. The house hadn't just been passed down to me, it had been entrusted to me as the keeper of our family's gathering place. I won't let you down, Grandma Rose. I know you won't, sweetheart. You already proved that when it mattered most. 6 months later, as I write this story, Sunday dinners at 847 Magnolia Street have become a cherished tradition again. The house is full of life, laughter, and the kind of love that my grandparents built their legacy on. Vernon has become my partner in maintaining both properties, and our relationship has grown stronger than it ever was before the crisis that nearly tore us apart. Sometimes the best inheritance isn't money or property, it's the opportunity to become the person your family needs you to be. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply show up, day after day, with shaky hands or steady ones, and prove that love is stronger than any temporary difficulty. In the end, Grandma Rose was right about everything. Family isn't about who deserves what, it's about who shows up when showing up is hard. And when you do that consistently, with genuine love and without keeping score, you don't just inherit a legacy. You become one.